Well, we've had a couple good questions. It said, "Hey Tim, I heard you mention boring on a portion of the hinge from the face cut side, and what kind of guidelines can you share regarding this type of bore cut?" We've used it on small back leaners. I think you guys have done some with that. There was one I did a little video on this past week. One of the guys had sent a message talking about having to take the hinge off to be able to let a tree roll between other trees or roll away from a fall, as far as an object or something. Something that we had done for many years, instead of just trying to chase the tree, is to think about, well, I've got it, it's going to be a tight shot, I've got longer limbs on this side of the canopy as it hits this tree, and I want it to hang up, and to be able to actually set your hinge up for that. And so the concept there is, if you've got a 20-inch tree and you got roughly a 16-inch hinge across it, what you would do is you'd bore out the heart before you complete your back cut. You put your face notch in, you would bore through the heartwood, and maybe set it up to where you'd have, say, 6 inches long by 1.5 inches on the up lean side, and then on the leaning side, towards where you want it to roll out of, you might leave 2 inches by 1.5 inches. And so you've taken out the hinge in between those two. You haven't relieved anything from the back at that point. And then, according to whether it be a forward leaner or whether it's back leaner, you'd either start your cut from the back, place a wedge if you needed, or either you might even bore cut out. You could go in and establish that 1.5 inch thickness with a bore cut, bad side first, then good side, and then cut back and release the tree with the trigger. And more or less, as the tree went, you still have the steering. You don't have to be there. And when that limbs hit on that left side there against the other tree, it just spins itself right out. So you still have some decent steering, but the biggest factor is you don't have to be there trying to get through the debris. You can be back into an escape route watching everything happen. And so many times people don't think about that. And it's not slower. When you start to look at, over the years, we used to stopwatch quite a lot, with different pattern cuts and things. One thing that was very evident when you start stopwatching stuff is you could see that it's amazing how slow it is when you're sitting there watching, trying to figure out what the tree's going to do, and you're waiting to see if it's going to move, and then the wind blows a little bit, you slow down, you do this kind of thing. If you really consider, if I go in there and I know exactly what I'm going to do, I do it, and basically I can do it faster. And so that's kind of the concept of having that plan clear in your head. But a lot of people don't think about setting that hinge up to begin with and then releasing it. And then what we've done before, I think you've done some too, the small leaners, is, and you don't want too much side lean in that case. Bore through the middle, then cut bad side and good side under it to support for a wedge if you needed to wedge it. No real reason to do that on a small tree to keep it from splitting, but on the larger trees, that gives you the opportunity to cut out the heartwood too. And one thing I mentioned a little bit in that video, but what causes a lot of the pulls is at the growth ring. Think about the circles in the tree, whatever that shape is on that particular stump. As the tree starts to fall, as you're cutting from the back, as it comes into those ring circles, is it pushes out in those corners. And so that's where your splitting comes from. Closer it gets to the edge there, the more push apart that you have. I think that's the reason why a lot of people, especially on a little bit heavier leaners, would cut back into 50%, is trying to get a longer hinge. But when you get closer to that center of the heart, you don't have that pressure pushing out on the rings, but you still have some. So when you take, and I mentioned this last week, is to take a small shave off of the end of the log and just see where it starts to fall apart there. Where the hinge is, you can start to see it just kind of falls apart, because it's actually, as that tree goes over, as you're cutting that wood from the back, as you're cutting, even if you cut real fast, it starts to pull that fiber either out of the stump or out of the log. And in most cases, it comes out of the log. From a quality standpoint, we would show that, especially to mills and stuff, high dollar hardwoods up in Pennsylvania and along the Mississippi River up in Illinois and Indiana. We could actually show that having that hinge closer to the outside rings and out of the waning or out of the cylinder of the tree, we reduced a lot of loss. And that loss comes in the form of trim. The mill would say, okay, we want 10-inch trim, or we want 12-inch trim, or if you've really got good operators, you can be, 4 to 6 inch trim on a 12 to 14, 16 foot log, and you're not pulling fiber in that, so they don't have to reblock off the ends and tops to be able to regain their fiber that's not pulled. And that means more for whoever purchased the timber, or if you're working by board footage, you're not wasting anything, because a lot of times we'd see that they would scale. They always told us, you got to scale from the top of the notch, and that's the reason why the Humboldt, on the West Coast, with the international scales and stuff, they were flat, so they would just go from the end of the log. But the common notch, or in that case too, the open face, they would say, we got to scale from the top of the notch. Well, if that's outside of the cylinder or outside of the waning, it's really not a loss. And the other thing is that you can cut lower stump, and so we would actually gain sometimes a half a foot to a foot of usable log there, and that's really the high dollar part of it is down there at the base, as long as there's no rot. So if the operator could keep it from pulling, you could regain quite a lot. I was up in Michigan doing a thing with the Ford Foundation up there at the forestry camp, and the local logger there had sold a stand of bird's eye maple to a Asian buyer, and he just happened to be coming over when we were out there. So the guy said, "Come on, ride with us." And so I went and went out to this beautiful stand that is almost like a plantation of bird's eye maple. The buyer was going around, had his tally sheet that was sent to him. I guess he was out of Tokyo or something. He had his tally sheet and he was checking, and he was looking where the forester had marked the stumps, with a dot for, no higher, or where they wanted the base cut at the flare. I remember one or two trees, he didn't speak very good English, and he said, if you could cut 6 inches lower, I'd give you another $75 or whatever, I don't remember what the dollar amount was. It's probably more than that with bird's eye maple. But it was something where he was stating that dot's too high. He said, if you can get it all the way down to the ground, that gives me, with trim and everything, a lot more usable wood. And so that was very expensive wood then, and I'm sure it is even more now. But that's kind of it. When you start to look at utilizing that face notch cut, you can take out a lot of those rings. The tree goes, no matter what type of face notch you use, it keeps that pulling from happening. And it can also help you too if you're using a little bit less face notch to get the tree to move off the stump or whatever. Keep that heartwood from pulling at that point. So it's just something to think through. But that's kind of neat. People don't think about that bore cut. And we do basically the same thing with a storm tree. Which one would that be? What technique would that be for a storm?
Like a tongue and groove kind of thing?
Exactly. Yeah. So you're taking that center piece out and cutting the compression and tension. And basically that bore cut through removes a lot of that fiber that's capable of closing or twisting and pulling. And that's something too with storm stuff. When we talk about limbing and bucking, is when something is twisted like that, if you've got to move that down, you can put a face notch and then utilize a bore cut there, and even take the center piece of that hinge out and be able to keep it from splintering at all, because what happens is it's going to try to seek its original position. I saw some good pictures today of some storm stuff out in Texas that had, those umbrella type trees we were talking about. It was all twisted up, and sometimes a bore cut can help you with those to keep you from getting stuck. That's for sure.
That's right. And I know a lot of those trees that like to untwist, usually if you're not prepared for it, they grab the far side of your bar, get you pinched on the end, but on the far side of where you're standing, and it can be kind of frustrating.
It can grab you real quick, and it's not so easy to get out sometimes.
No, that's where I love that tongue and groove, and if you got a machine handy, that's sometimes the way to go right there.
Oh, especially if you have a machine. Offset cuts can help you out a lot in those cases too, but they tend to come apart a lot easier, whereas the tongue and groove can keep it from twisting on you. Another question here. This is kind of interesting. I want us to spend some time on this. I had a gentleman, he sent a message in yesterday, I believe it was. He said, I bought a 562 because of this video. And that the video was the one I did about a year ago, the auto-tune carburetor. And I think the one that he had referenced was not the one that I did with David Breeden, but it was one that I had produced before that one, I think. And he said, I've used it almost every day. 11 months later, the saw needs rebuilt. The auto-tune ran so lean, it literally burns up cylinder and rings. Never again will I own an auto-tune saw. And I said, I'm sorry to hear that, and I'm sorry if I was part of the issue there, but I don't think so. I mean, basically, I was just talking about what the operator's manual was talking through. He said, no problem, it's cool, just a lesson learned. And I've heard that more times, that people have had some issues with the auto tunes. But what type of things could be? And not saying he didn't do these. I sent him back another message, and I said, if you'll email me at info@farstaps, I'd like to troubleshoot this and see exactly what the cause was. Maybe we can pinpoint it down to help somebody else on the auto tunes, was my main purpose in that. I didn't write all of that. And I had even thought about if he would send a message back, I might even be able to help him out on a saw. But it's something that when you have an issue like that, what do you answer? In other words, if you got one of your guys that come to a storm and their saw's just not running right or whatever, and it goes down, I mean, how do you approach it? How do you troubleshoot that situation? And I think that's something that's important on any brand or any saw. I saw one of the videos had a couple days ago too, is talking about I can't use this. There's a steel. He said, I can't use this steel because it won't run. And he started it up. He pulled the pulley, got it started, and he revved it up, and he let off the throttle and went dead. He said, that's the reason why I can't use this. He said, I've got to have a saw that runs. But if you run a saw much at all, you know what the problem is there. It's not adjusted correctly, or either it already has cylinder problems or something. There's some other issue with it. It could even be somewhat out of gas at that point. But it's something. How do you troubleshoot that situation? Well, you got to go back to the basics. Mm-hmm. And I think it doesn't make any difference whether you're a professional logger or arborist or whether you're cutting firewood. You've got to have somewhat of a understanding of how the basics work, like we've talked about before. And just thinking through here, and I don't know if he was that accurate on his information here, but he says he uses it almost every day. So I don't know if he's cutting firewood or he's running it in the woods, what the deal is, or if he's a tree guy. I don't know. More or less, he says he's got 11 months and now it needs to be rebuilt. Well, how much time can you put on that saw in a day? And this is something I worked with a lot of the mills. The first program I put together with the RDT system, reduced downtime, was with Weyerhaeuser out in Klamath Falls, Oregon. They had a unique sharpening system that they worked with, and then I think it was Clint there in the shop. He had a system that he went through, checking out the saws for the guys, and then dressing bars and chain and making sure all that was ready to go. And that was the first place I really started stopwatching the actual operation of the saws throughout the day, and just to see how much time went on them. How much time, Warren, do you think goes on a saw in a full working day?
My gut says probably close to 6 hours, somewhere around there.
in the testing, we started to kind of keep up with it by number of tankfuls, because most
Okay.
all saws are about 30 to 40 minutes as far as run time on a tank of fuel.
Mm.
So we started talking to the guys we put out saws for test is keep up with the number of tanks, and we pretty much knew. Now, this 562 XP, you could plug it into your computer and you could find out exactly how many hours it's got on it in those 11 months. So now it's kind of technical to be able to do that. But for sure, we checked. I stopwatched quite a lot, and guys were saying, "Oh yeah, I run that thing 10 or 12 hours a day." And they did work out there in the woods 10 or 12 hours a day. But when you really looked at what the time was it went on the saw, it was about 5 hours. And so though you start to think about, you got 5 hours and you got a 5 day work week. What's that? 40? That's 25. Is that right?
25 hours.
And then you're the computer guy. So if you got 25 hours a week that you're putting on the saw, and let's just look at it at the max. You got 4 weeks in a month. So what's that? That's 100.
It's 100.
You got 11 months of that. So how much is that?
1,100.
1,100 hours. Let's think about now, if you had a car or a truck, and most people start thinking about, well, I get up to 100,000 miles. I'm either going to do one of two things. I'm going to go trade it because it's getting up some mileage, or either I'm going to run it to 400,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, if you're going to run it to 400,000, you've got to think about, probably that guy has got, several oil changes in that picture. You've got air filters, you've got all this kinds of stuff. Let's take that 100,000 miles, and you think about, let's say we were able to do 60 miles an hour the whole time. So how many hours would that be?
So 100,000 divided by 60. 1,667, basically.
1,600. So not a whole lot of difference. You've put 100,000 miles on that vehicle, and now you've put 1,100 hours on that saw in that 11 months, right?
Yeah.
You're probably not going to do 100,000 miles in 11 months on your vehicle. But now let's look at this. What if you had a gas engine or a diesel engine in your truck or car? What's the RPM usually max, unless you got somebody with a lead foot? Probably what, 2,500, something like that, maybe 3,000 average.
Yeah, diesel lower, but yeah, gas probably around there, 25,
So let's say
22,
with a
25.
diesel or the newer gases with those 10-speed transmissions and all that stuff, you're probably looking at 1,500 to 2,000 RPM.
Yeah, I cruise at about 1,600.
Miles.
Yeah.
So now let's look at that 562. What does it turn? 13,600.
Yeah.
So that's 2 to 3 times the amount of engine revolutions than you'd have on that truck with 100,000 miles. And then I ask people, I say, well, let me ask you this: how many tanks of fuel have you done? Well, I don't know, man. I went through a lot, Well, you've got also the mixing, and you've got gas and how good it is and all this kind of stuff. Or maybe they use canned gas, whatever, but you've got hopefully good fuel going into it, but that's not always the case. Then you start to look at, how do you transport it? Is it open to moisture and humidity? Because that gas, no matter what kind you got, starts to attract moisture. So if you're just letting it ride around the back of your truck, that's one thing too. And then the next thing is that it doesn't take but just a couple of minutes during a hard rainstorm to mess up a fuel system very quickly. And then I would ask, next thing is, how many air filters have you replaced? How often do you clean the air filter? Those are all things. And I find most of the time a saw that's been going on for, say, 2 to 3 years, a person has taken pretty good, consistent care of fuel. They blow out the filter, maybe clean out around the airflow and stuff a good bit, once a week at least, something like that. And so you got a pretty decent maintenance going on. You start to think through it though. Still, how long can that filter go without replacement? You can tap it out, you can blow it out a little bit, but then at some point in time, according to the type of filter that's on that particular saw, you got to replace it. But how many are replaced after 2 or 3 years?
Probably not a lot.
I find very few.
Yeah.
I had one, and this is a story I thought about when I was discussing all this. This was in probably 1992, something like that. Soren and I were putting on a program with the American Pulpwood Association at that time. It's now the American Forest Resources. And Richard Lewis had put it together. I think Ken Ralston was still there at that time. And then Mr. Ward, which I still see him on Facebook every once in a while. He's retired now. He was kind of keep up with all the different writing materials and all that kind of stuff. And he actually wrote the script to a video that I did with them and stuff. Anyway, we were setting up this workshop for a bunch of loggers, and I had half of them for part of the day and doing maintenance RDT. Soren had the other half working with felling techniques and living and bucking down in the woods. And they had set up tables for me, and I guess that morning session I had about 15 guys, something like that, for the maintenance. Most of them went with Soren's thing because, most everybody knows about maintenance. I started going down through thinking about how much time do you put on your saw, how much do you sharpen, how much do you clean, when do you tear your saw down. I mean, talking about not down the cylinder and piston, but basically cleaning the flywheel and clutch and all this kind of stuff. Changing sprockets, those kinds of things. We had some time intervals that we had set up for those kind of things. I said, let's check some of our saws out. So they had their tools there and they had their own saws. And I had this one guy, and I think it was a 056 AV. It might have been a 76, but I think it was an 056 AV. And this was one of the earlier versions of the steel 056. And I got down and I said, well, y'all check your filters now. Let's take a look at your filters. And this guy, he's just kind of standing there. And everybody else was pulling their covers off and stuff, looking at things. And I said, have you already cleaned your filter? You checked it? He said, what do you mean? I said, your air filter. He said, my saw I don't think has an air filter. I said, well, it's 056. Have you changed something? He said, no, I've been using this saw for 6 months. And I don't think it has an air filter. Nobody's ever showed one to me. And I went over and unscrewed the top cover and pulled it up, and the whole thing was just packed. And on that particular filter, it was a flat element that set down over the carburetor. The top went down and sealed it, but the air came up from the bottom and then over and into the throat of the carburetor. I looked at it and I took it out and shook it. He said, golly, I didn't know that thing even had a filter. Nobody ever showed me that. And I said, well, I don't know about that, but I said, look at this. And the left upper corner of the filter was gone. I should have taken a picture, but you can go on Amazon or whatever and look at the filters for the 56 AV, and it's just flat, and it had you could get it two ways. You could get just or three ways: a nylon filter, and then you could get a flocked filter and it had kind of like metal wire on it, and then also you had a stainless wire version also. And most of them that came to the States were the flocked style. And so what had happened, that whole upper left corner was gone. And he said, golly, he said, I bet that thing's been bad ever since I've had it. I said, well, it's probably warranty, isn't it? And I started laughing with him. And I said, no, I don't think so. How do you think that corner got broken out? And I had seen it a couple times on workbenches. The saw would have some scoring, and I would pull the muffler cover off, and there would be a piece of screen wire in there. What caused it to happen was, the guys didn't use all that much from bucking in those big saws. Most of it was felling. It was in large hardwoods in Maryland. And basically, they spent a lot of time over here on its side, right? Well, the dirt built up underneath it, around the carburetor, and the last part that would get full, because the back would kind of shed out some of that dirt, the last part that would get packed up would be the last upper left corner of the filter. And what happens is that thing is just like if you put a straw in your mouth and you cover up the end of it, suck on it, that straw is gonna collapse. Well, that saw's sitting there doing that. In that case, probably 9,500 RPM a minute. And so it's sitting there. You take a piece of metal wire and bend it back and forth like this. Pretty soon, it's going to do what?
Cyclic fatigue.
It's going to break.
Yeah.
And so you don't even have to be an engineer to figure that out, do you?
No.
So when you start to look at that whole corner had left, and the dirt was then going through. Like I said, a lot of times on those big saws, it would make it through the throat of the carburetor, go in the intake boot, go through, hit on top of the piston, and it would bounce out and into the exhaust. Sometimes it got caught, in a ring or top of the piston, but a lot of times it would be a piece of wire that was in the exhaust. And a lot of people thought it was an exhaust screen, but it wasn't. It was a piece of the filter. So many times people don't start going down through the whole troubleshooting process. They just say, well, it's this, it's auto tune, or it's this, that, and another. I don't know how well he cleans his filters. I don't know whether he actually looked at what they call the air injection, right? If you have buildup on your flywheel and you don't clean it off about once a week or so, if you're using it every day, it gets caked up. And if you ever had a fan that has dirty dust on the fins, what happens? The air stops. It doesn't move much air anymore. And the same thing on that flywheel. If it has dirt built up on it, it can't move, and the air going up into the air box is changed. And so what happens at that point in time? It starts cutting back fuel on that automatic system. If your air filter's dirty or it's not getting the airflow to the air box, pretty soon the actual probably ignition and the automatic carburetor starts shutting down. And so now you've got what? You've got RPM is still there. It's trying to adjust to get the RPM back up to where you can cut with it, but it doesn't have lubrication. Even if you've got your fuel mixed right, even if your fuel is right. And people don't think about that. And if you go here, I've got a thing that and this is out of the manual. Did that show up? Can you read it?
It's a little fuzzy. Oh, there it goes. Yeah, I can read that now.
So this is on page 36 of the 562 manual. This is a quick daily, weekly, and monthly maintenance that should take place. And if you go back, all of that is found in that section, the maintenance section, and it actually goes by step how to remove the starter cover, clean the air filter, clean the flywheel, all that kind of stuff. But these are all things that, necessarily doesn't need to be done right on these time schedules. But if you don't do those at some point in time in 11 months, what's going to take place is there's going to be an issue start to happen. But it's something to where and you can get those offline now. Even if you didn't get a manual with your saw or you didn't this, that, another, you can still get that because I just pulled it off the line today. So that's something to where those schedules are out there. The operator's manuals are there. There's a lot of stuff in the operator's manual that nobody ever looks at. The thing though is that not stating that this auto-tune carburetor or ignition module doesn't have an issue. And that's the whole thing. People start to say, oh, they're just trying to get out of this or trying to get out of that. It's a piece of junk or whatever. These auto-tune saws are very high performance because they have to be able to produce them and meet the EPA standards if you're going to sell them. I mean, that's basically the reason why such a push on battery-powered saws is because in a couple of states, what they're saying is that after December this year, you're not going to be able to buy a two-cycle engine, gasoline powered. And so, the last attempt by the manufacturers like Husqvarna and Steel and others too that are trying to make these saws as automatic tuning as possible to keep them as efficient as can be. And that means that they're going to run leaner. So you've got to think through all of these things of this maintenance has to be done. That's how you troubleshoot it to find out, well, was it an issue with the auto-tune? If you take that saw in and your flywheel is all gummed up, your sprocket is all worn, your air filter is packed up, all this kind of stuff, then how can you say that it's the auto-tune?
Can't.
And I'm not picking on Robert here, this guy. I'm just stating that by the information that I have here, I can't troubleshoot the saw, right? I don't know. He can't even troubleshoot the saw unless he has gone through all of the system and understands what needs to be done. I don't know whether a dealer someplace, just kind of was negative with him or or whether a dealer told him that's what it was and he's not accepting it, or whether there is a problem, he's just out of warranty, but a lot of these types of things, if you have proven to really handle a lot of this stuff and there is an issue that's known, because I'm going to tell you, warranty wise on any manufacturer, if there's an issue that's actually warranty in most cases, it shows up very quickly. And they don't just see it on your saw, they see it on a lot of saws. And a lot of times you'll see a recall off of it, or basically they determine, well, we're just going to eat this. So anybody that you come in, you got a saw or trimmer or whatever that comes in and it has this problem, just write it up, put it on warranty. But warranty eventually comes out of the cost, or actually your pocket on the saw, because the higher the warranty goes, the more they have to charge for the piece of equipment to cover it. So, warranty comes out of the bottom line of the production process. That's something that so many times people don't realize. But to be able to troubleshoot that and to be able to go back and discuss it with a dealer or with you got to have the rest of the stuff there. An operator needs to have some basics on that. And you can get those basics right out of your operator's manual. He said he'll never buy another auto-tuned saw. Have you had issues?
Sorry about that. Yeah, no, I'm still breaking mine in, to be honest. But I know if you change elevations or you change fuels, you change circumstances, the auto-tune saws are very sensitive to those changes, and so you need to calibrate them. And I know David did a great video on that not long ago. And so if you're, that's part of your RDT. If you're not maintaining the saw and not, going at regular intervals and ensuring that everything's where it's supposed to be and how it's supposed to be, then I imagine you will have trouble, especially with the newer saws.
Well, one thing, whether it's auto-tune or whether it's adjustable, if you're keeping a check or you understand somebody has shared with you, what to look for, what to listen for, how to adjust, how to set it, those kind of things. If you're aware of those things, when you're running along, you're in that big piece of oak or whatever, and especially in long bar country, is that if you're sitting there and your chain starts to get a little bit dull, and you're not pushing on it, you're trying to make it through that last piece, and that rascal's not pulling any load that much, and all of a sudden RPM's going sky high, what should you recognize as an operator there?
Something needs to change. Something's off.
Or if you're cutting along more and all of a sudden it keeps dying down with you, what would that be?
It could be fuel, it could be air.
Yeah, so
not properly adjusted.
What do you got to do? It's what we were just talking about. What do you have to do to be able to recognize that? And hopefully, if you're not mechanical, you're going to recognize it, and then you're going to be able to explain it to a mechanic at the dealership, right?
Mm-hmm. And like you said, go through those, kind of comes back to the basics of the RDT. So you kind of use that as a diagnosing tool to kind of figure out process of elimination. Okay, where could this bottleneck be? Air filter's clean, fuel filter's good. Everything's clean as far as the flywheel or the air intake. All that stuff. Then you can kind of say, okay, so there's obviously a problem deeper than just those surface-based things. Is it M-tronic or auto-tune, or is it manual adjustment? And you got to start looking into that as well. And that's where you kind of get into the weeds on more of the particulars of that. But
if it's been a year and you haven't looked at your spark arrestor, if you run your fuel a little rich, it can gum up that spark arrestor screen. And I watched a video the other day. It was a short, but somebody had a weed eater that was just bogging down. It wouldn't go up to full speed, and they'd been messing with the adjustment screws, and they took off the spark arrestor screen, and it was as black as could be. I don't see how in the world it even ran in the first place. And and so, there's any number of items you got to maintain your saws and keep up with them. And especially if it's a livelihood, you got to the tools are a big part of it.
Yep. I've seen, and it doesn't have to be long term. You can, I've seen them on the back of log trucks that, guys would have a saw rack back there, and they would put their saws down in these saw racks, and they might have 3 or 4 saws there in that rack. Well, all of a sudden the thing wouldn't start, and they say, "Look, I just got this one the other day." Said, "I don't think something wrong with it. I don't know what it is, but can you take a look at it?" And I'm out there looking at something there. They sent me down there for another thing back years ago. I pull it through, and it's a sound you don't forget. You'll hear it on trimmers, you hear it on saws. If the exhaust is stopped up, it's kind of a type of sound,
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how accurate that sound was, but it sounded right. but what it was is he had a dirt dauber nest in the exhaust.
Wow.
And so, I look in there, and I took a screwdriver, and I got dust out, and that's what it was. I mean, it happened over a weekend, he said, because it was running fine Friday, and now this thing won't start at all, And it did sound funny. He said, "I don't know whether I blew it up or what, And he didn't blow it up. It's just a dirt dauber tried to live in it. But I've seen that a lot with trimmers, especially. And those are things, that you kind of recognize if you see a lot of them. But it's something, if you have kind of a process of elimination there, it's something that you'll find pretty fast. A lot of it is listed in your operator's manual, to check your exhaust screen. Well, if you had that issue, if it wasn't the exhaust screen stopped up and it's still doing that, what is it going to be? It's going to be a dirt dauber, right? If you find that the exhaust screen is all stopped up, then that's the issue. It's that troubleshooting process that really makes a difference there.
And then you got fuel quality too.
Yeah.
It's depending on what kind of fuel you're running, and that can be a whole nother issue too with the carburetors and stuff.
That to me, I mean, fuel. I've always said fuel is the number one issue out there, and it causes. I bet this is theory by art, but probably 75-80% of the warranty situations is caused by fuel. Manufacturers picked up on that very quickly, that the bottled gasolines and stuff. That's the reason why they pushed it so hard. I mean, it's they made money off of it, yeah, but it reduced down their warranty expenses quite a lot. Fuel, major issue out there with problems on the saws. All stuff that you have to put in that troubleshooting process. But Keith, you missed that on he's talking about the face knot. You have to go back and see that. And then you had another question. What was it the other day? I didn't pull it off of Instagram.
Yeah, I was just curious what people use for brushing up a tree. Once the tree's felled, you need to go brush it up. A lot of people use the saw that's in their hands. You go out the West Coast, they're using, a 70 or 80-60 saw with a 32-inch bar. And I'm getting a little older, and I like the light stuff that's nimble and cuts well. And so I was just curious what people like to use to brush up the trees if they're doing, processing a tree to finish it up. Obviously, little saw that I like is a little 220C battery operated. If it's 5 inches or less, honestly, that's the saw I'm grabbing to make my cuts. I love it. It's light, and I hardly know it's there, but it'll zip right through stuff. It'll keep up with, an 034, 036. I've watched it many times. They're cutting, and I'm cutting side by side with them, but we get up 6-8 inches, and of course they just walk away from me. And so I was just wondering what other people have discovered with the newer type saws, especially the battery for me. My son's made a big investment in that, but I think it's kind of cool to just kind of see what people do and what their ideas are when it comes to doing the bucking and limbing.
I saw there was one reply to your question. I can't bring it up right now, but Shannon Durer.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I've talked to him over the years. Never really met him face to face, I don't think, but Shannon said he uses one of the newer model Echoes. I think is what he's using. So he wrote that back on your question.
And he was probably talking about a tree, because a lot of people have gone to those because they're kind of like a motorized handsaw. They're so stinking light. They're only like 4 or 5 pounds, and you can just do some little modifications with them, much less get them ported, and they they cut like the devil. And so a lot of people, but I was kind of thinking more along the lines of, what people are doing on the ground. But I know a lot of people, a lot of folks that up in the air, they're like, you can't hardly beat it. The modern small saws, micro saws that really cut well, and the battery saws that cut really well. Even Milwaukee, I saw several posts recently on YouTube and Instagram and Facebook where the top handles there are doing really well. But my thought mostly for what people do on the ground, because that's where most people cut.
I think a lot of times on the West Coast, what I always heard from guys on the big saws, which we always kept fairly small bars, but like one of the guys on a message last week, he said you can use a big saw on a small tree, but you can't use a small saw on a big tree. But I don't know if that's always true, but
yeah,
historian always used to say is that if 80% of your work is cutting stuff that's 8 to 10 inches round, then and you're only making 3 cuts on this 100-foot tall tree, as far as bucking the logs to 40 foot or something like that, then why do you want to have a huge bar? Because as you go up, let's say the average is 40 inches across, you can take a 24 and be able to do 2 cuts, and do them just about as fast. But it does make a difference with terrain and that kind of stuff. But if the majority of your work is limbing 8 to 10 inch stuff off, then a 20-inch bar with a good sized horsepower behind it is pretty handy to have, I think. But most of the guys purchase the bar by their height, because they wanted to walk down the log or walk beside it or down the log, and the bar length kind of fit at a perfect angle to where they would take the limbs off as they go down through there.
Yeah.
And so you'd see a 6-foot guy and he's got a 32-inch, or you got a 6'4" and he's got a 36-inch bar, or you got some of the guys who was on a big tree, they'd even go, 38s and 42s and stuff like that, because they want to be able to walk down the log and be able to reach around and get lower limbs too. That's a lot of weight. I never had the muscular ability to do those kinds of things very much, but I could handle a 20-pound okay. But when you get up into that 35 and 36 and some of those bars, at that time, these new lightweight bars made a big difference. When you
Huge.
get up from 36 to 42s and stuff. And a lot of them would buy it by that. I was going to mention Robert Albritton. I talked to him one day this week, and he got in his new Husqvarna top handle with the clutch. He's absolutely amazed with it. He said, he's got a few charges on the battery now, and that thing it just basically it cuts like a gasoline saw. He said, and he's had a couple other in battery, but it's something where that a clutch makes a huge difference in the ability to maintain your cutting speed. When you load just a little bit on most of the battery units, they just drop off, so you got to let the chain do the cutting. Except for this one, you can do kind of like you did with the gas power. You can apply the pressure that you need. So some of that's going to take place on the battery saws. I don't know. I was surprised that Steel didn't look at that when it was on the 300 series. My battery pole saw, I think it has the 135A.
Uh-huh.
I think it has a clutch on it. Do you know it is yours? Don't you have one of those?
I don't have one of those. Chris has one of those, but I'm not
He
sure.
had a smaller one. And I noticed that was hard to stall, because it had I think it has a clutch on the power unit, because the head is just like the regular pole saw on that one. It doesn't have a motor on the head, so they have that clutch to be able to take the shock out of the shaft going up. I got to check mine. It's up in the shop. I haven't used it since we moved in August. I mean in December. I got to check that and see, because I was amazed. And if they use it on the pole saw, it seems like they would have noticed something about that ability on the chainsaws.
I got a random question. I was reading through your ebook, and I just out of curiosity, it talked about when it came time to deep clean the saw, taking it to the dealer, for a power wash. I was just curious, what is the power wash? Because we use air compressor, brushes, Dawn dish soap, kind of break up everything. But I was kind of curious about what that power washing process looked like. Is it kind of similar to a dirt bike where you have as long as you protect the intake and muffler, you can kind of hose away, or is it kind of?
We had a little kit that we worked with, which is a piece of rubber inner tube. Yeah, you would loosen the carburetor and slide that down through, kind of like doing a pressure test on a crankcase. And then same thing, loosen the muffler and be able to drop a rubber piece down there and seal it off. If you seal off the intake and exhaust, you can pressure wash the whole thing.
Cool.
But what we were really doing when that book was put out was in Europe, they had in Scandinavia, they had a system that they used. They leased a lot of saws to the loggers. The loggers, they would use the company saws. They would lease them out from the company, and the dealerships would set it up, or the shops there at the timber companies would set it up. They had like a washing machine. You'd actually take. You can see them there. You can see pictures of them online. You could set 4 or 5 saws into some of these things, and you would do that. You would put the rubber on the intake and exhaust, or some of them would use a plug on the carburetor on the outside, and the other that's enough to keep it from getting wet. You put it in there, and this thing, like a dishwasher, washes the power heads. We had one we set up at Rocky Creek. We had a carburetor. You can get it from Auto Parts, a parts washer that you hook a airline to it, and it vibrates. And so you put the cleaning solvent in there, and more or less we'll use just like Dawn dishwashing detergent and water. And basically you could set that power head down in there and turn this thing on for about 4 minutes, and it came out squeaky clean. And as long as you let everything dry out, you didn't wet the filters, and you didn't fill the crankcase up. And even if you did, you could basically blow it out and get it back going again. You didn't let it set up with moisture in it. A lot of the systems that they had over in Europe, man, they had things that would hold 4 or 5 saws, and you can see them online. There's several companies over there that use them, and it like a big dishwasher for chainsaws.
That's pretty cool.
But that was what we're talking about. But I even on my saws, if I use like Simple Green, something like that, I'll be very careful about getting anything in the exhaust and the intake. After that, everything else, unless you just don't want to use something that's caustic, that's going to mess up plastic or rubber or aluminum or whatever. So you're just closing that off and cleaning up and blowing it off. But I found that if you do it on a pretty regular basis, it's easy to do.
Yes.
If you let it go more than about a week, you're going to be sitting there with a time. But there's very few people that, and I was showing that maintenance thing, there's very few people pull the starter cover off and clean the flywheel and that. And on today's newer saws, it makes a big difference. I was just thinking too, and I was mentioning that a while ago, I had one guy, he was doing some tests, and he was in a cedar area out in South Dakota, I think it was. And he was doing testing for us with the 044 and the 064, and this was back in the first models of that. And I had sent it out to him, and he sent it up. He said everything seemed to be running pretty good, but the doggone thing, the starter keeps messing up on it now. And I said, well, don't touch anything. I'll send a UPS pickup, and so I got it back into Virginia Beach. I pulled off the starter cover, and the cup on the flywheel was almost completely full of cedar dust. All right. And so the pawl it couldn't go out into the little grabbers in the inside of the pawl, the cup. And I just got to cleaning that up, and I scraped, and I kid you not, Roger Simons he was laughing like crazy, because I took a piece of paper and laid it down and just scraped it all into it, and took it over to the UPS scale, and there was almost 3/4 of a pound of dirt, the cedar chip stuff, just off of the flywheel. And people talking about how heavy it was. The saw was heavy and this kind of stuff. I said, guys let 3/4 of a pound of sawdust build up on the flywheel, and it's going to get heavier.
Said you had a whole piece of MDF in there.
Yeah, there's quite a lot, and it did wonders for the balance too. Actually, a lot of vibration, that's built in those cases. And then when you had like I was talking about earlier, the air injection type of situation, if that flywheel has a coating of stuff on it, it's not going to cut the wind very well and push enough air into your airbox, and it's pretty well sealed on those deals. So, you end up with it compensating with your auto tune, and now you've got, just like a dirty air filter, you've got a lean seizure happening because it's sitting there leaning it out, trying to get the airflow and the fuel back up to the same ratio. So it's kind of interesting. Anything else, gentlemen? It's about 9 o'clock. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate y'all dropping by tonight. I hope you have a great weekend. We might see you next Thursday night, huh?
Should be here.
Very good, very good. Working on a couple videos, trying to get those out first of the week, and other than that, it's been a good week around here. So I hope my cold is over with anyway.
Yeah,
We'll be back going strong. But I appreciate y'all dropping by, and good sawing to you.
Yep, you too. Thanks so much. Take care.
See you, Keith.
take care, guys.
Bye.